All right, here we go. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. Okay? The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Now let me do that again, because you think you got the answer right, but you didn't. All right, so I'm gonna try it again. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? Okay, you're telling me it's 10 cents, and that's wrong. Okay, and let me show you. If the ball costs 10 cents and the bat is $1 more than the ball, the bat is $1.10. All right, because $1 more than 10 cents is $1.10. So $1.10 plus 10 cents gives you $1.20. Okay, the ball is worth 5 cents. 5 cents plus $1 is $1.05. $1.05 plus 5 cents is $1.10. Now what just happened was, that's not necessarily a math trick. Okay, what just happened was I gave you an example of a shortcut in your brain and how it can lead you wrong. Okay, math is one of those things, if you're like me, I can't stand math. Anytime that I'm reading an article or something, anything, or a video game that puts something on the screen that makes me have to start doing math, my brain just because I can't. It's not my forte. But even those that don't necessarily have an aversion to it, what happened is your brain oversimplified it. Okay, and the reason it did that is because it has to. Your brain is dealing with, by some estimates, it's something like 11 million pieces of information every second. That's how much information is bombarding your brain every second. Okay. Now we have the capability to process, I think it's something like 50 of those subconsciously, and we can process like 7 that we're aware of. Okay. So if you add all that up, your brain has to take shortcuts. It has to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to function. So what just happened with that math problem was I gave you those nice round numbers. $1, 10 cents. So your brain took this shortcut thinking, well, the answer is obvious. It's that round number of $1 plus 10 cents. And we kind of skipped over that part of $1 more. Okay? Now, that's an example of bias. Okay? We all have bias. We all do. It's because neurologically in our brains, we categorize people just like we categorize things. And it's not something that we do out of malice, okay? People aren't necessarily evil because they do this, all right? It's a biological mechanism so that you can recognize who is a threat, okay? And who is not. So when you see a fireman, all right, you see somebody dressed as a fireman, you understand what that is. And you understand he's not going to rob you, as opposed to somebody who has a gun in their hand, or even doesn't have a gun in their hand. Maybe they just have a mask on. So you categorize people all day long. We all do, okay? And it's a proven mechanism that we prefer people that look like us, not just in race, but in religion, in gender, all of this stuff. And this is not, I'm a white man from the South with blonde hair and blue eyes, and this is not just about me. All you have to do is walk into any high school lunchroom and you're going to see the exact same thing. It's because human beings are tribal. The reason that we are tribal is that bias. In our minds, we have evolved over time to recognize that the things that are similar to us are safe. But if we go sticking our hand into the muck somewhere in a swamp in an area that we're unfamiliar with, it might get bit off. So biologically, as a piece of our evolution, okay, we have learned to categorize things, and we do that with people, okay? And how this bias can become a problem is when it starts to drive a prejudice, okay? When our thought processes are guided by these biases, and all of a sudden we start doing things that we don't even realize that this bias is a part of, okay? This is where the concept of white privilege comes from, all right? And I do believe there is such thing as white privilege. I also believe we have largely conquered it today, all right? And I also believe that we can continue to do so if we can all recognize this bias. All right? Because just now, when I said I believe we have largely conquered it today, a lot of people out there listen to that, and their first reaction was, it must be easy for you to think that. Or you just think that because you haven't had to deal with it. And it's true, I don't deal with bias against me due to white privilege. 9 times out of 10, anybody that's white, I'm going to take advantage of their bias, unconscious or conscious, by looking like them. And the vast majority of people in power in this country look just like this. They're white males, okay? And that's why the concept of white privilege is valid, just in that if all those gateways to power are being controlled by people that look like this, and we know it's a biological mechanism that human beings are going to prefer other human beings that look like them, we also know that this is going to give me an advantage. Now, here's the point. How do we conquer this bias? All right? That's the question we all need to be asking ourselves. Well, the first thing you have to do is realize that you have it. All right? And once you've accepted it, like I have accepted it, then you just make sure that you pause before, during, and after any decisions like this between people to check your bias. Okay? To make sure that you're making this decision based on one thing and not the other. This happened to me in Korea at one point when I was separating teams based on skill sets. I actually ended up separating these teams because of their race. I didn't even realize it. One of my soldiers had to tell me. And then it was a good opportunity for me to stop and look at it and go, no, why did I assign these people to these teams like this? And it was based on, and I checked myself, I redid my logic, and I agreed with what I did in the first place, and I didn't change anything. Because as far as I'm concerned, my original reasoning was valid, and I'm not going to change it based on your perception of racism or prejudice or bias. My perspective is just as valid as yours. And as long as we can exchange those perspectives and learn from one another, whether or not we agree, whether or not we empathize or sympathize or anything like that, just being able to understand that one perspective is different from the other. There's no way I'm ever going to experience life in America as a black man. It can never happen just based on who I am. But no black man in America can experience what it's like to be a white man in America. Okay? And the good and the bad. The good, of course, there are many, many good things about being a white man in America. Trust me, I know this. And I also know there are some good things about being a black man in America. No black man would agree with that. Okay? No, well, you can't say no black man would agree with that. I would enjoy anyone agreeing or disagreeing with me on that. How about that? Anyway, so the reason I think that we have largely conquered white privilege is, how do you check that bias? Like, what are the steps involved so that if you come to me and you say, hey, I need you to take a look at this decision you made, how do you check that bias? Okay, what it is, you stop and you pause and you consider when you make this decision. And what I think today, how many people in America do you believe have never heard of the term white privilege? And how many people in America do you believe have never heard of racism? Okay, and this is just my perspective. It could be right, it could be wrong. The vast majority of people out there, if they're having to choose in this day and age, if they have to choose between a white man and a black man, and they are not consciously prejudiced. If they're consciously prejudiced, there's nothing I can do about that. But if they're not, and they have to choose between a white man and a black man, how many people do you believe are not going, I got to be careful here. I don't want it to appear that I'm being racist. I don't want it to appear that I'm being biased. So you consider that a little longer. All right. And if you do, and you come to the same decision, you can still pick whoever you were going to pick. But I think that in this day and age, in 2019, especially when you consider what it was like in 1964, 1970, 1980, even 1990, the idea of white privilege and bias and racism and implicit bias and anchor bias and mirror bias, all these things. So I think we've gotten better in that regard. Now, having said that, there are a lot of current challenges. There are a lot of current challenges that are disproportionately affecting minority communities. Okay? And the reason for that is that a lot of our problems that I think people are associating with racism are a result of unconscious bias due to a correlation of, poverty, crime, and minorities. Okay, and a lot of people don't even realize it. But you turn on the news, that's what you see. They're getting better about all this stuff. But it used to be you turned on the movies, that's what you saw. And in this day and age, whenever you talk to somebody, they all say the same thing. Like, that's just. But in your mind, you have to make sure that you're covering down on that subconscious side of your brain that could be driving decisions that you're not even aware of. We all like to believe that we are all making our own decisions, and you are. No one is excused from the consequences of their decisions. I don't care what your background is. When you cross that threshold of I'm gonna do X, and you consciously make that choice, I don't really care about the reasons. Okay, you consciously made that choice, and you have to deal with the consequences. You're the one that weighed whether or not. And I'm getting ahead of myself because we'll talk about criminal justice reform later. But nobody is excusing that. All right, but you do have to understand that there's a disproportionate way that minority communities are being affected by poverty. All right, and this is not necessarily because of the direct decisions of the people who are living in poverty now. What we have to remember is when we talk about how great this country is, because I firmly believe this is the greatest country in the history of the world. And it will always will be, just based on the philosophies that we were founded on. They can get no better than that. All right, only the rest of the world could only follow our example. But when you look how far we came, that founding hypocrisy, the Three-Fifths Compromise in the same document as the Bill of Rights. Something that declared life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are the same men that owned slaves. That founding hypocrisy is where we started. And look where we are now. In a little bit over 200 years, a man went from he could have been owned as property to, elected via popular and electoral vote to the most powerful office in the land. And that didn't signal the end of racism or the end of bias, but it is a benchmark to show how far we've come from chattel slavery and selling another human being's children for money all the way to where we are now. Okay? And it's that progress that makes us great. It's that driving motivation to always live up to those founding ideals, even though we don't appear to be doing so at the time. It's that drive to be better. That's what's brought us from where we were in the 18th century to where we are right now. But we still got some problems, and especially, we still got some problems in our racial communities. It's because we went from chattel slavery to Reconstruction to Jim Crow to the Civil Rights era, and then after the Civil Rights era, we moved to this place where the segregation started slowly going away. We have a tendency to look at this history and believe that it happened so long ago. Okay, but the people that were granted the right to vote under the Civil Rights Act are still voting. That's not somebody's like great-great-grandfather there are people voting today who couldn't when they were 18 because of their race. It's not that long ago. I am 38 years old, and I grew up in a very racist part of the country, and I heard my dad say many racist things. That was not that long ago. Imagine what my dad grew up with if he grew up in it. So my point is, we're never going to overcome this racism, the bias, the prejudice that we have today overnight. And we have to realize that this is a generational struggle. And the best thing we can do is recognize what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong today so that we can continue on that road to improvement. Because what we have right now is a closed loop of poverty, crime, incarceration, and back again. And it's not just minority communities being affected. It's poor communities all over the country because what we've had to happen in reaction to poverty in this country is that we've been treating the symptoms. We have vast majorities of when I say vast majority, the vast majority of our budget is going toward Medicaid and food stamps and welfare and all these things that are treating the symptoms of poverty and nothing to fix whatever the underlying problem is. That you not being able to afford food in this country, that's a problem. Like, I want to make sure somebody has food, but like, if you are a true American, if you're an American and you believe in this country, you don't want a handout. You want to work. If you can. If you cannot work, that's a different story. But if you, like, I don't know anybody who just wants to sit at home and collect a check. I'm sure they exist. I just don't know any of them. Everybody I know that's collecting some kind of benefit is working. And they're working hard. They need just that little bit of help. But to me, if you're working that hard in America and you still can't afford food, that's a problem. All right. So this closed loop we have has turned into because Black Americans make up about 13% of our population, but they're 40% of our prison system. And what I was saying before about not excusing poor decisions, that's true. I'm not, everybody who was convicted of it, rightfully convicted, because we've also got a wrongful conviction problem. But anybody who was rightfully convicted of a crime, you need to pay your dues. That's, nobody made you make those decisions. So, but going forward, whenever we look at how do we fix this, like, so what are we doing with our jails? What are we doing with our criminal justice system? I think a lot of people have a tendency to think of it as just like this trash can, where we throw the people who we don't think can function in society, we just throw them away. Hang on.